Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachate Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. May you all have a happy journey today. Even if there's some rough spots. The topic, it's very fitting because today is the disappearance day of Bhakti Siddhanta, and the topic is from Bhakti Siddhanta. He has this phrase of hearing with the spiritual ear. And then, what does that mean? We'll hear more about his Nama Vrata this evening because it's part of his biography that we'll be discussing this evening. But he took a vow. There's circumstances surrounding his taking that vow, but he took a vow to chant 3 times 64 rounds a day. And it took, for a number of years, it took him something 7-8 years. So many billions of names. He's a Superman. Who can do that? Yesterday, when we played that recording of Srila Prabhupada's Japa, he was chanting really fast, wasn't he? Like, that's why I turned the volume down, because I can't chant that fast. Maybe some people can chant that fast and hear with attention. I can't do that. Some of you here may know Shyamasundar because he visited here for a previous Japa retreat, and he keeps track of how long it takes for him to chant one round, and he found he's taking longer rather than less. So something like, he has it down to like 10 minutes and 38 seconds per round, because he chants lots of rounds. So speed is not the essence. It's hearing is the essence, and then hearing with the spiritual ear is the essence. So just like, yesterday, layers of what our sankalpa is, our objective is, our capacity is, and then maintaining that, and then always maintaining it, always striving to increase. So this is a very high hearing with the spiritual ear standard. We'll explore it a little bit. The author of this phrase was able to do that. Otherwise, he wouldn't say, he's not a pretentious person. He would say what he had experience of and encourage. So a broader sense is beyond mechanical chanting, because there is such a thing. And there is the other thing. So here's Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur during the Kartik month, because he would observe during the Kartik month, or the Chaturmasya period, he'd observe, like his father did, not this, not that, and so he has hair and he has a beard, but he has some nice scriptures by his side and the beads in his hand, and absorbed. So he's posing for a nice photograph. Many nice things to say about Bhaktisiddhanta. One of the many very nice things is something that's another Superman quality. He had the capacity, upon reading something once or hearing something once, he could remember it perfectly. Like rote memory. Just press the button and here comes what he heard or what he read so many years ago. Prabhupada tells the story of a man who was called on a witness stand to testify something that he was a witness of. And the man repeated exactly what was the conversation, because there was some confrontation or something. And the man repeated it exactly. And then the attorney who was examining him asked, he found out that's not his language. He remembered perfectly of another language. Some people have capacity to remember. Like Nimai Pandit said to Keshava Kashmiri, some people have the gift of composition, some people have the gift of memory. Bhaktisiddhanta had many gifts, and that was one of them. There's a process that we're going to embark on, and that's the process of focusing our attention on the holy name. And I'm just sharing that I described this process in one Japa Retreat, that when I was a kid, most of us were kids at some point, you hold a magnifying glass over a piece of paper or something that's combustible, and if you hold the magnifying glass at the right angle, the light of the sun becomes a dot. That's what this image is showing. And the dot becomes as hot as the sun, because the rays of the sun is heat and light, and you can focus the rays of the sun so it becomes fire. And it will burn. So the day after I was explained this in a particular place, the kids came running up with their piece of paper, and they had spelled their name using a magnifying glass, holding the magnifying glass over a piece of paper and spelling their name. It works. Similarly, the holy name has Nija Sarva Shaktis. Nija means his own. Sarva Shaktis, his own potency. All of the spiritual potencies of the Absolute Truth are included in that sound vibration of his name. That's the nature of absolute sound, compared to relative sound doesn't have that capacity. The qualities of the object of spiritual sound and the spiritual sound, abhinatvam nama namino, they're absolutely the same. Now, how to realize it? This is one of the ways to realize it. And next you're going to see the little image of Patanjali. Patanjali taught the same thing. I mean, it's not a secret. He taught it. And in his Yoga Sutras, He is describing the process of Ashtanga Yoga, but in Ashtanga Yoga, there's also meditation. There are different type of meditation, but it's a type of meditation, or just what yoga in general is. And here's a Yoga Sutra that's describing abhyasa, or practice. You all know these terms, abhyasa. Abhyasa yoga yuktena cetasa nanyagamino. Abhyasa, practice. And practice has these three primary elements. Dirgha kala, over a prolonged period of time. Like hold the magnifying glass steady over a prolonged period of time, focusing the light of the sun. And Nirantarya, undeviating steadiness or continuous over a prolonged period of time. And Satkara, he uses this word that we say faith or Shraddha. He likes this word, Satkara, with respect, reverence, and devotion. Or in Rupa Goswami's language, it's Adhara. Same that nice verse about fixing one's consciousness. And by practice, that's what we'll be attempting today, practicing. More or less focused, more or less. The prolonged period of time is going to be there. And then more or less with faith or reverence, devotion, adhara. And depending upon that attentiveness, then the sound will not just resonate on the eardrum and then send a little signal through the nervous system, because the nerves are touching the eardrum, and the eardrum will vibrate from the sound, and then the signal will go to the brain that says, I hear a sound. Now, we're going to be hearing the sound whether we're attentive or not, but if you're attentive, then the clarity of what that sound is and the Nija Sarva Shakti's potency may come through more instead of less. So our experience is going to be person to person, and even in one person, different over at one period of time and another period of time. One of the exercises that we didn't do, but sometimes it's done, and that is chanting. It's called chanting in dyads. So, meaning two people, one person is chanting, the other person is listening. And when someone's listening to your chanting, guess what? You're going to be more attentive. And then listening, chanting, listening. And then after some minutes, then the person who's listening critiques what he heard or she heard. And then switch roles. It's a nice experiment. And one of the realizations that I have had from that experiment is you can hear the qualitative difference between when somebody is distracted and their mind is wandering and when they're focused. The quality of chant, the quality of the sound is different, audibly. What to speak of Krishna. So we're calling Krishna's name, and we're sometimes not distracted and focused. And the practice is to strive to stay focused. That's what this Patanjali Yoga system is describing, or what Abhyasa, the second item, steady over a prolonged period of time. That's our objective, or something we're striving for. And then we're going to go up a little bit. This is Bhakti Siddhanta's teaching. The ear conquers the mind. He has a very nice way of describing. He describes that the mind and the other senses, he uses the word quibble, like argue, quibble. Who's most important? But when the ear is hearing, it's no longer a quibble. The mind submits, because that's when there's proper hearing. The mind takes its position. It no longer quibbles with the ear. The ear is, in our day-to-day life, primarily the mind rules. Where the mind goes, that's where we go. And when you don't have control of the mind, it's kind of all over the place. To the degree that one's mind can concentrate on X, then it can carry you to X. It's a principle. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam chajantanti kalevaram. Where the mind is fixed on, that's where you're going to go at the time of death. And, here we are, sitting in the temple room because the mind said, let's go to the temple room. So here we are. The legs moved, and because the mind rules. And then when it's proper, the intelligence directs the mind. But he has a very nice paragraph, which I didn't read, but I guess we can circulate it. Premadatri, if I send you, not now, but if I send you his little statement later. The ear is most important, more important than the mind. So often it's the mind rules, and there's a position when we're chanting, the mind doesn't rule. The mind is conquered by the ear. And that's a proper position for the mind. And then depends on what you're hearing. It can be, some other kind of sound that you're hearing. And then the mind goes, the attention and the mind goes to what one's hearing. So spiritual progress is dependent upon the hearing of sound. We all know the principle. By hearing spiritual sound, the sleeping condition of the soul becomes awakened. Just by sound. Just by sound. So then how attentive are we to that sound? So that's Bhaktisiddhanta's teaching. Be maximum attentive. And he uses this phrase, the hearing with the spiritual ear. What's the spiritual ear? So there's the eardrum and the nervous system that connects with the eardrum and that goes to the brain, and the brain says, I hear a sound. And then what is that sound? And whatever. That's the evaluation of what that sound is. The power of discrimination, the faculty of discrimination, the intelligence may tell you this sound is this and that sound is that, but then hearing a spiritual sound, it's beyond the material ear. He makes this nice statement. I should have printed it or made it available. When we hear material sound, the material intelligence is activated so we can assess what that sound is and what its meanings are. Supposing you hear some conversation or someone speaking in a language that you don't know the language. You have to learn the language in order to understand that sound. Otherwise, it's just sound. So that sound becomes intelligible means, there's some tools. So then the spiritual tool is something that's inherent with everyone already. That means, according to what Bhaktisiddhanta teaches, just hear with the spiritual ear and you'll understand what the meaning is. So until that time, we have a translation of what, or an explanation of what a sound is, a mantra, either whatever, spiritual sound or otherwise. So, however, when that stage comes, when we can hear with the spiritual ear, because there's the elements, the gross and subtle, cover the soul. So there's a spiritual form, there's a spiritual mind, there's a spiritual intelligence, there's a spiritual ego, and there's things that cover all those. And so his advocacy is not just with the material ear, but with the spiritual ear. He gives the example, for example, a small boy, sometimes their ear is pierced when they're little, and they have a little, mark in their ear from having the ear pierced. So like that, he uses this comparison, like that the hearing with the spiritual ear is piercing the ear, the physical ear, and entering more deeply into the spiritual ear. Here's the same image that you saw before. There's 3 times. I'll just read it again because it's nice. By cultivating our connection with Sri Krishna in his vachaka form, gradually and naturally we will become invested with a potency which will touch and transform our hearts and the hearts of others in amazing and unexpected ways. Now the graphic is nice too. Similarly, same message one more time. By cultivating our connection with Sri Krishna in his vachaka form, gradually and naturally we will be invested with a potency which will touch and transform our hearts and the hearts of others in amazing and unexpected ways. In the same message a 3rd time. So the outcome is entrance into the reality of our spiritual identity. So this is a painting of a path that leads to Govardhan. In the background, that's Govardhan Hill. And where's one of Krishna's favorite places is Govardhan Hill. So who knows where this journey is going to take us? Who knows? And we don't have a steering wheel. It's wherever Krishna takes us. When you get immersed, it starts to move in its own way. The experience of being connected with Krishna through his holy name, it moves in its own way. I meant to go this way. There, the Hare Krishna mantra. So we'll be reciting the Hare Krishna mantra a bunch of times today, and strive to hear with the spiritual ear, meaning beyond just a sound, because we'll hear sounds, we hear our own sound and we'll hear others. And that's nice. Even that is, abhas, nam abhas is nice. But better than nice is shuddha nam. So striving something worthwhile, it's the same phrase as what we heard. It takes time, and it takes some effort with intention, with intelligence on our side. And then practice, and get distracted, and come back and focus again, continue. When we have an activity of sharing, commonly there are devotees that express something like, from this round to that round, I remained very focused. I was amazed at how focused it was for me, and during that focus, the experience was, something otherworldly. But the opportunity, the doorway for that otherworldly experience is available at any moment, particularly when in the process of hearing, when we're hearing the mantra, or hearing any spiritual sound, hearing with rapt attention. So strive for that. And if Krishna smiles, it may happen. But if it doesn't happen, keep striving. And Krishna will hear. That was this little message that we circulated, showed several times. Be present. And Krishna will let you know. I'm here. It's a relationship through the medium of the Maha Mantra and the relationship of our serving Him. So that's it. I promised a short class, and it's a short class. Now, two important things. Today's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disappearance. So many of us, if not all of us, most of us, will be fasting. So that's fine. That will help you when you're chanting. And the second is Mona Vrata. We didn't make a big message about it yesterday, but Mona Vrata means, and if you have children, you have to deal with children, then do so, in whispers, and otherwise silence. In silence when it comes to when we take prasadam, and silence. I mean, you can eat silently, but the conversation can, when the 4 o'clock bell rings, you can talk again. And otherwise, there's only one sound. So it's clear. It's a standard practice at occasions like this. I think we'll just skip the questions and resume chanting. Happy journey. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Krishna Ram Ram Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama
Hare
Rama
Rama,
Rama Hare Krishna Krishna
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama
Hare Krishna, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna.